Howdy, this is Jake Pryor, and you're listening to episode 11 of Origin Point. In this episode, we get the chance to speak with Winston Moy about how he got his start with desktop CNC machining and where it has led him. You want to jump into the interview?
Yeah. Why don't we just go ahead and get started since we're already talking about transportation. We always do a little bit of an icebreaker so that our audience can kind of get an understanding of your personality, and that is, what is your mode of transportation? So you're driving a car right now across the country. What are you driving?
So I'm driving a Subaru Forester, and it's a car I picked up back in 2015 because I wanted a car that could go semi-fast because I just started watching like Top Gear and I was getting into cars and stuff, so I wanted something with at least 220 horsepower. And so Subaru made the Forester, which is one of the few cars under 40 grand that you can get that has like an upgraded engine, and so that does about 250 horsepower, and I've taken that thing on the racetrack about 3 times. I have a friend, a former coworker, who he used to be the president of the Jersey Shore Region Porsche Club of America. And so when I passed by his desk, I saw like trophies and like a track map, and it's like, hey, you like race your car or something? And he was like, yeah, I do. Like, and we have an event once a year, and it's open to any car. It doesn't have to be a Porsche. And so I joined him, and I caught the driving bug, and so I got a car that could A, haul lumber, and B, haul it around the track. That's what I'm driving, but it's, I mean, just over the I've driven close to 1,900 miles now, and the refinement, the polish on it isn't quite what I want, so I want to upgrade to something a little newer, a little smoother and quieter. I don't know. This road trip is sort of tipping the scales for me, because I used to think like, oh, I want a fast, like, sporty car, like more handling, like less comfort, and now it's like the pendulum swinging in the other direction. Like, I want something I can cruise around in for hundreds of miles, like, comfortably. So it started as I need a car that'll do everything mentality, and now it's sort of swinging back into the I want a car that I can take on adventures thing. But I mean, the best thing to do is have 2 cars, but until I get settled down, this is sort of my one-size-fits-all compromise car.
I like it.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a very versatile vehicle for all of the things that you're looking for. Well, how would you describe your interest to someone who may have never heard of CNC machining?
So a CNC machine, for those who don't know, which I think it's a small percentage at this point, but it's basically what would happen if you gave like a robot a Dremel. Computer control, carve anywhere you want. But I got into that because I wanted to make things, and I didn't have any skill with my hands. So in grad school, I had like a little studio apartment, and I had like a little hacksaw, a power drill, and a Dremel, and I was like, I want to make stuff, but I can't really, because like with these tools available at my disposal, it's like you can make really small things, and usually like with a Dremel, it's like hand controlled, you're like carving things. I didn't have the skill to be able to make anything useful with it, and I was watching like Bob Claggett, Steve Ramsey, and like Jorg Sprov, like making these like elaborate contraptions, and I was like, how can I do that? And as an engineering student, I was like, well, there's this technology that takes all the skill out of it. Little did I know it would be its own rabbit hole of learning, but I was like, I can have a robot fill in for my manual deficiencies. And so I bought a CNC back in 2013. It arrived 2014. It was a sort of a Kickstarter thing. And when it finally arrived, I started making stuff. And it's been a continuous learning journey since then, of just trying different projects, learning new techniques, and just generally having fun. So
it's awesome.
That's great. So you talked a little bit about how you first got interested in CNC work. How did you acquire your first small-scale CNC? And let's talk a little bit of how many you actually have now.
So way back in 2013, I was doing some basic research online because it was kind of new. Like 3D printers had kind of been a thing. They're kind of going mainstream. Like at that point, I think they just started like being sold at like Staples and like mainstream stores. But CNC was very much like a DIY, like wild frontier of hackers making these things. And so I was looking online, looking through articles on like top 10 like DIY CNCs, and the Shapeoko 2 came up, and I had seen that it was version 2, not version 1, so I knew it had a little bit of history. And so I took a chance. I ordered that, and I was in it was a pre-order phase thing, so I was in batch 1, and Inventables was doing the fulfillment for that machine. And so I think in November they were like, hey, we're running a little behind. If you want to jump on batch 2, we'll give you like a $50 gift card or something. And I was like thinking, nah, I'll stick in batch 1. And so I got my machine in January of 2014. I had basically the first unboxing video out there, and things sort of just went from there. But it was really just me trying to find a machine that could do with a useful workspace. So a lot of the machines that were out there previously was like 8-inch workspace, like 6-inch, like little, like tiny, like old MakerBot, what was it, the Cupcake or something?
Yeah.
Like that small size machine. And I want something at least a foot wide, foot deep. And so the Shapeoko fit the bill, and that's how I ended up with that machine.
Well, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I've actually learned more since I bought my my X-Carve.
Yeah.
I bought my X-Carve and then immediately found out that the Shapeoko 3 is basically made by Carbide. I was like, oh, okay, that's why they're the 3. And it's been an eye-opening experience since kind of diving into it now a few years later. I mean, you said 2013, and I didn't really start looking into it until Christmas last year, I guess is when I got mine. So,
but they've kind of like, at least the market's sort of stabilized. Like, you know who the players are, and it's not like if someone puts out a CNC, like you have no idea if it's going to work or not. Like the technology's pretty proven out at this point.
Yeah.
You got a controller, you got separate motors, and the software is even pretty understood now because you've got like Fusion 360 and all those other offerings.
That's been the one that I've been using lately a lot, was Fusion 360. Although there is something to be said for being able to open up easel and put something in there real quick, just a shape, to know it's accurate.
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of the stuff people are doing, like easel, Carbide Create, Mesh Cam, it's just open an SVG and just start cutting. So it's a really quick process.
Yeah.
To get back to the other part of the question of how I got so many CNCs, after I had the Shapeoko 2 for a couple months, the creator, Ed Ford, he messaged me and he was like, hey, I like what you're doing, just keep on doing it, sort of just to encourage me to keep going along with it.
Wow.
And,
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's cool to get that kind of recognition. And fast forward about a year or two, and the Shapeoko 3 is getting ready to come out. He emails me and he's like, hey, I've got this in the works. Do you want to come over to my shop and film a promo video for it?
Awesome.
And I was like, I've made it. So he flew me out to Illinois. We shot a little trailer for the machine, and a couple months later he sends me one of those. And so then I had the Shapeoko 2 and the Shapeoko 3. And so I just started, like, made an assembly video for it, started doing different projects on it, really fell in love with it. The year after, they came out with the expanded version, so the XL and the double XL. So he sent me one of those, and so then I had 3 CNCs. And then I got the Nomad. So Carbide 3D is sort of the parent company of the Shapeoko brand and the Nomad CNC, which was its own Kickstarter. And so they combined forces after the Shapeoko name left Inventables.
Yeah.
And so Ed emailed me. He was like, hey, we've got a scratch and dent Nomad that we can't sell. Do you want it? Sure, I'll take it.
Awesome.
And so I acquired a Nomad, and so that raised the family to 4 CNCs. And at that point I was like, this is getting to be a little too much. So I gave the Shapeoko 2 to a teacher friend.
Oh, awesome.
So we can just play around with it and get a little more utility out of it.
Yeah.
Because as a learning machine, even though it's not like super powerful, it still lets you cut out ideas that you have in your head.
Yeah.
And so I figured that would be a good way to give it a little more use in its life.
Definitely. It's a great starter.
Yeah.
To learn how the mechanics of it.
Mm-hmm. And then about less than a year ago, the Autodesk Cam Challenge. So it's a thing that Autodesk hosts, and it's like basically a competition online. They give you a theme, and you upload a project. And one of the raffle prizes for the contest last year was a Pocket NC 5-axis CNC. And as luck would have it, I won that machine. So I added another CNC. So I went from having 4 CNCs, giving one away, getting a new CNC, and going back up to 4. So
it's no shortage of size machines that you could use.
CNC rich.
Yeah, I used to say that I had the world's greatest living room machine shop, but then just cutting. I started cutting like aluminum and like different exotic woods, and doing that on carpet just isn't a fun experience.
I can imagine that.
I moved to the garage and I lost that title.
Oh. Well, did you have any goals of like having a small scale manufacturing when you started, or did you have like a different goal in mind?
I really just had no idea what I was doing. Like I made the unboxing video, which is honestly a pretty boring video, but it put information out there. Mm-hmm. And that's why people started gravitating to my channel. But I didn't really know what I wanted to do with that channel. It was an outlet for my creativity.
Okay.
And I didn't realize that it could actually help people. So back then I was just like, oh, this is cool. I'm going to make it and share the process with no expectations beyond that. And then it started getting traction and people started like, hey, that's a great idea, or hey, I learned that tip, thanks a lot. And that's when it started snowballing into the thing it is now, which is still a pretty modest channel, but now I've sort of shifted focus to like inspiring people to get into CNC and showing them that it's not this crazy, like really difficult to learn process.
Yeah.
And the maturity of the software kind of helps. Mm-hmm. But for a lot of people, it's just they don't realize what they can do. Like what the machine can do and what they're capable of doing with these like tools that are now really easy to use. Yeah,
the cost has come down quite a bit too. So it's more within reach.
It's so much more approachable for like the average consumer, and so I sort of just adopted the mission statement of just inspiring and educating people, because I think Bob Claggett, he said that you sort of need something to keep sight on, because if this becomes your daily grind, unless you have a motivating factor that's beyond just like, hey, I need to make a living, eventually you're going to burn it. And so for me, it's the underlying thing that I always want to do is teach people. And so at the end of the day, even if like I'm tired of a project, I'll still push through because I want people to learn from that process.
Yeah, and overcoming the problems that you probably have with that really helps people too, because I mean, I know I run into several problems on the machine, and then with a quick search, it's like, oh, so somebody else has had this problem and they've solved it.
Yeah.
and it definitely helps.
I'm in a weird position where I don't specifically make videos like that, like how to fix, like, oh, your CNC starts cutting in the wrong spot. Really basic things like that, which I'll start doing once I'm at Carbide 3D. But for now, it's just like, I'm not just showing you like a project, I'm sort of informing you on the process. Like, hey, this is where I started, this is the idea, this is some of the things we ran into along the way that caused problems that we had to fix, and this is how we ended up where we are. And so it's that journey from start to finish that I feel like I'm showcasing more than just like a simple like tips video or like.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a entire project start to finish. And
it's not like a tutorial.
Yeah.
There are twists and turns that happen, and it's that narrative that I want to share more than anything else.
And I think that narrative really brings home the fact that, you know, a lot of people, I feel like they think with CNCs, if it doesn't go right the first time, they're going to break something, and it's going to be detrimental, you know, and cost them a lot of money. And as long as it's not a very fancy bit, it's generally going to cost you about $10 when you crash the machine.
Yeah, it's not the end of the world. Like, I've crashed my machine like dozens of times. Nothing's broken. I've broken the occasional end mill though, but it's a really small price to pay for what you can do and what you will eventually learn.
It's an educational tax. That's pretty much what it is.
I love how when I was a kid, like computers were just starting to really get into normal households where, you know, like maybe middle income families were able to start affording like a Packard Bell or whatever. And here now we're talking about kids being able to get their hands on automation equipment like 3D printers and CNCs, and the fact that there's people out there like you who are interested in showcasing that is really awesome. That, you know, now a whole generation of people are going to learn how to do something so much easier than maybe we experience.
I mean, if you just think about it, you know, your toddler is going to grow up with a 3D printer in the house. and mine is going to grow up with a CNC in the house. So it's very interesting to have that difference. It's just like when our video game home consoles were introduced, and now it's a whole different aspect of getting out of the house, so to speak.
And it's also I interviewed one of the founders or creators of The Other Mill, and she phrased it in a way that sort of made me realize how important this is. All the jobs of tomorrow are going to be digital in some way, and unless you have that education, you're not preparing the kids of today for the jobs of tomorrow. And so making this mainstream, making it approachable and accessible is really important if you want to prepare them for like the kinds of manufacturing jobs and engineering positions that you're going to see 10 years from now.
Yeah.
Everything's going in that direction. I mean, there will still be manual processes, but if you want to participate in the manufacturing of tomorrow, like, you kind of need to understand digital fabrication. And
where it's coming from, because I mean, if you think about it now, the before these homemade machines came about, really, I mean, back when I was in high school, I worked at a machine shop and sheet metal shop, and those machines there are the Haas machines and everything. They're tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, some of them hundreds of thousands of dollars, and just completely out of reach of the common consumer. And so now that they are becoming smaller and more affordable, in the 3-digit to 4-digit range, is just really great, I think, because it opens that door, like you said, of being able to educate yourself more and educate future generations on, how does this process work? How does working in a 3-dimensional space is just incredible, in my opinion.
And like going back to your computer analogy, like a decade or two ago, we were just starting to get computers in our house, but we didn't really know what that would lead to, what they were capable of, what doors that would open, and then the internet came along. And so even right now, like, we're getting 3D printers, we're getting CNC machines, but we don't really fully know the impact that's going to have on how it changes, like, the maker community. Like, we could turn into like a distributed, like, personal industrial revolution where, like, you have like Thingiverse and you share files, or you manufacture things. There's a lot of like small businesses where it's like you have basically turned into a sign shop, or you can take on small prototyping jobs. So it sort of takes a lot of the capability from traditional large industrial shops, job shops, and like professional machine shops, and it brings it down to like, hey, you can just go to your neighbor and be like, hey, do you need anything? Oh, you broke this? Let me make it for you.
Yeah.
And so it opens up a lot of cool possibilities to sort of bring stuff to the community scale as opposed to like the large corporation scale.
It also revolutionizes a lot of the other handmade things too, right? Like, you could do leatherworking and buy yourself a laser machine and personalize it now. So you've not only been able to make something with your hands, but you've also been able to brand it a specific way. With my pottery, the reason I got a 3D printer was because I wanted to make my own stamps. I didn't want to have to order them from people. So I bought a 3D printer, and now I can do that in my house, which means that I've elevated my ability to merchandise to a point that makes things a lot more customizable, and really has grown my business to a point where I don't think that I would be selling what I'm selling now to as large a community if I hadn't taken the steps to try and do something with 3D printing.
That's cool.
It's neat to see how all the different 3D printing and CNCs are able to add to certain professions. Like, I would have never put a 3D printer with a pottery studio. That doesn't, I mean, at first glance it's like, why? and then you really look into it, and there's tons of uses, not only for using it stamps and things like that, but actually I found that there is one company that actually has 3D printed pottery, and so they 3D print the pottery, put it in a kiln, and then fire it. And I'm just like, that's, it's crazy. It's very interesting to see how different industries are taking this technology and using it in such different ways. Using it for concrete, or for pottery, or subtractive manufacturing, such as using it for wood. things like that. It's really interesting.
So Winston, I know what happened with me when I bought a 3D printer. Was a lot of people were like, "Oh, you have a 3D printer? Can you make me this?" Have you received any random crazy requests for commission pieces based on your CNC experience?
Usually they're not too crazy. Like my roommate, he was proposing to his girlfriend, so he needed a ring box, and one of my guy's former coworkers needed like some coasters, so like I prototyped some for him. So those are pretty simple. So locally, hasn't really changed my relationship with people, but because of the whole YouTube thing, I've got people asking me like, hey, can you like prototype this part on a 5-axis machine just so I can see it, or can you like make like this or that? One of the cooler projects was an audio company had an award plaque idea that they wanted to make, and it's one of those things where a sign maker is not going to be able to do it. Pure traditional woodworker is not going to be able to do it, and so you kind of want a jack of all trades. And I guess I never asked them how they found me, but I'm assuming that just my odd eclectic portfolio of just different projects made me qualified to take on sort of an open-ended creative prototyping yet still production job. And so I guess just the practice of just trying different things builds up your toolkit of different techniques you can pull out of your hat, and I guess that sort of gives you a unique skill set and makes you qualified to take on these jobs. And whenever people ask me like, hey, like how do you like get like businesses, and like how do you get orders and customers, it's really just having that portfolio, showing people what you can do. Because if you're making a really simple thing like a sign, like those are a dime a dozen. You can like reach out to people on Etsy or anything, or like just even regular sign shops. But it's the creative stuff where they need to see that you can think through a problem and be creative about it. That's, I think, where the fun projects are. Otherwise, you could just get a 3D printer or a CNC and just recreate everything you see on Etsy. That's a very commodity-driven type environment. But for me, it's the creative stuff, the stuff where you're almost more of an artist than an engineer. But you still need both of those skill sets. That's where the fun is for me.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that it's kind of a crossbreed between engineering and artistry, because it's very interesting the way I believe that plaque that you were talking about was the oak. Yeah,
oak and acrylic and with brass nameplates. So
yeah, and so it was a mixture of materials, as well as the challenge of having to know things like woodworking, such as I remember one of the challenges on that one was the oak splintering in a particular way. Which traditional CNC machine shop is not going to. They're going to be more used to aluminum, not wood.
They would really probably not want to touch wood at all.
Yeah, especially in bigger machines that use liquid cooling and things like that. It just doesn't even make sense.
So it wouldn't go to a machine shop. A cabinet shop or a wood shop probably wouldn't take it on just because it's
too small.
Yeah. So you really need like sort of a community scale manufacturing operation. You find an individual or someone who is a jack of all trades, and that's I think there's a lot to be said for being a generalist, as Bob puts it. And that's sort of why I like DiResta so much. Like he'll just fearlessly jump into anything, different disciplines, and learn about it. And that's like he's not an expert in any particular one field, but because he's so versatile, he can do so many different projects, and that's what really gives value to his name.
Yeah. I like that if anybody follows DiResta and you watch his stuff, it's like 1 minute he's at Walmart, the next minute he's cutting something on the CNC, then he's welding something, then he goes home to work on his canoe. It's like just to watch the variety of stuff, it's like he's getting influence in one area, and it carries over to all the different areas that he's working in, but the results are stunning. And I feel like a lot of people think that he doesn't make mistakes on these things because they turn out so beautifully, but when you actually, if you pay attention to some of his vlogs and things like that on DiResta especially, he calls out a lot of his mistakes. But when you look at when you look at whatever the project is as a whole, it's very hard to see those tiny mistakes, because overall it's like, well, you still have a boat and it still floats. So that's the goal of the project. So so far, what's been your favorite part to make on the CNC?
Out of everything I've done?
Out of everything you've done up to this point.
That's a really tough one to answer. Because like they're all memorable in some different way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have some of my greatest hits in the car. Like I've got my wooden lightsaber. I've got one of the aluminum SpaceX drink coasters. The whole aluminum coaster thing, not the SpaceX one,
mm-hmm.
but that was like one of the most memorable learning experiences for me, because I thought I could do basically all of it, like cut all the aluminum blanks and send them off to get anodized and just find a laser vendor. But it turns out that I couldn't cut the aluminum on my CNC because it was warped and you can't sort of hold it flat to be able to cut it well. And so that's when I started to seriously have to reach out to other manufacturing services and industrial capabilities. Like I had to find a guy who did water jet.
Mm-hmm.
And that taught me a lot about just like being sort of a job shop and sort of going into the adult world of manufacturing and touching on like asking for these services and getting quotes and doing all the business stuff. That was like probably the closest I've come to being a job shop, and it taught me that is a scary world and I'm not ready for it. But I learned a lot from it. So that's the most memorable one. I wouldn't say it's my favorite though. Honestly, my favorite projects are the ones that solve a really practical problem. So like having a branding iron or some work holding clamps, like the little toe clamps that I made
mm-hmm.
that used both the Shape Oko and the Pocket NC to put the little bevel on the front. Those practical projects are what I enjoy the most. Plus, like the story arc, the narrative is like, hey, here's a problem. Hey, here's how I solved it. It's not like, oh, like I've got an idea to create some abstract thing that I probably don't need,
mm-hmm.
and I'll make it. But it's like at the end of the day, you come out with something that's useful, that improves your shop or your process, your workflow, and it's I don't know. It's just having something useful at the end of the day is pretty gratifying.
That makes sense. Yeah, definitely practical. Practical applications are always feel very rewarding because
mm-hmm.
you actually have something, you can use it, and it's just, every time you use it, you're reminded of how much work went into that piece.
Yeah, and like it just any headaches that you can remove from your process just are so much better. So like shop organization is something I really want to tackle next, and it's starting from basically scratch because I've just dumped my entire shop into a container.
Yeah.
I can hopefully put in place like processes like getting a nice tool chest with all the drawers that I need to organize everything, instead of just like clamping like all my clamps on one end of a workbench and just pulling them off as I need them. Like just really simple things I think would help me out a lot moving forward.
It sounds like one of the 4 machines can now make you a clamp rack.
The big one could,
yeah.
But I don't know. I just need to find time. I've got so many project ideas. I'm being pulled in different directions.
Yeah,
it's a little hard.
That's one of the ones that you don't get more of. Is time. That's a resource that's limited.
It sounds like the storytelling part is a big thing for you in regard to your projects. But when you start to look at your process, is there a certain point in your process that's your most favorite place to be in? Is it brainstorming ideas, modeling, your programming, or doing the problem solving? Do you feel like any of those things is like where your sweet spot is in your wheelhouse?
So my favorite part of the story is sort of the end, where I tie everything back together and sort of show like the conclusion to everything, because like that's sort of like any problems you faced, like they're all worth it because you got to this point. For the audience, the part that I sort of emphasize the most is sort of the software side, the CAD, the CAM, because that's where a lot of the unknowns are. Like once you hit go on the machine, like it's sort of out of your hands. But before that point, like how do you create like the optimal toolpath to cut something out? How do you use tabs and machine it in a way that like usually for thin parts you want to machine inside out so that the outside is supported until the very last operation. That's where a lot of I think the unknown knowledge is for people who are just starting out, just because the learning curve for the software tends, especially Fusion 360, is really steep. So that's where I spend the most of my time. and both of those are very different from my conception of how to make a video when I first started. When I first started, I was like taking a lot of inspiration from like Laura Kampf, like the process, the end, so the physical, tangible parts that you can see, like the machining. But it turns out that all the knowledge is imparted in every other part of the video but that. So like I have all this footage of like the machining close-ups of like the end mill and like all the beautiful process shots, but really it's just like, all right, we'll do like a 20-second montage and that's it, because there's no knowledge being gained there. Yeah. So I spend the majority of my time detailing all the other parts of it, and visually, I mean, I'd love to just like focus only on the machining, but I sort of relegate that to Instagram. I'll make a little montage for that. But sort of what Bob says is like you show it the clip for as long as it takes you to explain what's happening, and then you just have to move on.
Yeah, that makes sense, because you gotta explain what's going on step by step, and then but there's no, I mean, once you've seen one cut on the table saw, you don't need the other 10. Especially,
I don't have a cameraman. I can't make it dynamic. The only person who I'll give a pass on the whole like long process shots is Alex Steele.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. But you know, I hear that Chuck's looking for a job now that David Picciuto has a new camera guy. So
yeah. No, he got a new job, didn't he?
Who's that?
David's cameraman.
Yeah, but Chuck has always been his invisible camera guy.
Okay.
When he first started out and he just had tripods. Yeah, it was all tripods. He would just talk to the camera, and he named him the guy behind the tripod camera, Chuck. I think Bob Claggett borrowed him once. It's been pretty funny.
That's awesome. Do you have a dream project that you've always wanted to do? Maybe something for aeronautics or someone that you wanted to do a project for or with?
Aerospace stuff is really scary just because of the precision that's required, and I don't think I could get there with my machines, as cool as it would be. I know that SpaceX, they bought a couple Nomads for like really basic prototyping work, so it'd be cool to be able to like go in the factory and just like, even if I'm just like maintaining the machines for them, just a really basic thing to get my foot in the door there would be cool. But the project I really want to do is a camper van, because I've seen like all these people, like you cut out like the wall panels, like you make a cutout for like a sink if you want to plumb it up, and I was just thinking like I could totally use the CNC for all of that. But it's a really big project. It's a big undertaking. It takes planning. But just the idea of making something that's yours and personalizing it, like, oh, I want to spec out like the solar system. I want to put like a 3-gallon water tank in it. I want a bed here, and just making it your own is just something that's like super appealing to me. And I mean, there's a couple other makers who've done it, and I want to put my own twist on it and make that idea my own. So that would be a long-term project I'd want to do, but I first need the space, the garage for that. Then I need to secure funding for a vehicle, and to make that worthwhile, like, I need to be settled down and be able to actually go on trips. So it's not happening this year. It's not happening the first half of 2019. Maybe 2020. We'll see.
You gotta have goals.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome.
That sounds awesome. An entire project based around all of your accrued knowledge.
And it forces you to learn a bunch of disciplines, like the electrical, the plumbing, like really basic things. Like I wouldn't want to build a house or even just like a tiny house. Like it's just it's a lot. But the camper van, it's such a small scale that like, all right, I can plumb up like the drain from a sink, or I can like wire up solar panels to a DC converter to a battery pack or something. Like limited scope, something that one person can safely approach and learn. Like it's like with a house, like there's so many things that go into it.
And the other issue with like a house is eventually you sell the house, and so you're now liable, and there's codes to meet and things of that nature. Whereas with a camper van, there's no codes to meet. It's solely your responsibility to plumb the sink correctly and not
flood
the compartment. And if you do flood the compartment, it's yours. So that's kind of actually I have a high-low system in my truck in the back for camping. Mm-hmm. I'll have to show you that. It's kind of neat, but that's something that I came up with long before I was kind of into making, and I was more into camping. And it's been fun, but I do think that a small scale camper would be a lot of fun to build. How early on did you decide to start cataloging your journey with CNC machining? Did it start with that unboxing video, or
pretty much?
Okay.
So I mean, I'd made a couple really basic videos before. Like, I'll just set up my laptop with a webcam, point it down at the table while I like do something and make a time lapse out of it. I had a couple videos from like my college days that were pretty shoddy in quality, but that's sort of how we got started.
Yeah.
And as a kid, like, we'd go on family trips, and I'd have a camera, and I was big into photography back then. But then as like the age of YouTube started coming around, you've got channels like Freddie W and like Devin Supertramp telling stories through a visual medium that's not photography. Like, if a picture's 1,000 words, a video's 1,000 pictures, and it just seems so much more liberating to use that medium. So I started trying to have like make a point with my videos instead of just like showing like, hey, here's what I did at my desk in a day, like to actually explain what's going on. That's sort of the fundamental transition that happened when I got the CNC. So before that point, the videos were pretty lame, and after that point, I started going in the direction of explaining everything and teaching. So yeah, that was the turning point.
So how long did it take you to kind of find that turning point, to kind of find your voice, so to speak? Did you kind of nail it down a couple of videos, or do you still feel like you're trying to find it?
It took probably 3 years to really get confident with that.
Okay.
I remember going to Bay Area Maker Faire, and the Carbide 3D group was out there at that time, and I was talking to Ed Ford, and I was like, yeah, like, I know, like, this type of content is necessary, like probably like Fusion or something, and like when I get better, maybe I'll make a tutorial about it. And he's like, I think you're already qualified. And that's when it sort of clicked in my head that like I don't need to be a master of everything, but like if I can explain it well and concisely, there's still a lot of benefit that people can get from it. And so at that point I was like, all right, maybe I'll embrace this aspect a little more and actually go out of my way to try and teach and help people, instead of like sort of just sheepishly saying like, all right, I did this and it wasn't quite optimal, but like you can do like whatever. Like speak with a little more authority. Like don't pretend you know everything, but don't be afraid to lay out like the knowledge that you've gained and what you've done and what you can learn from it. And that was really when I started thinking like, all right, maybe I will like actually actively try teaching people. So yeah. Yeah,
because there's always somebody who knows more than you, and there's always more people that know less than you. So it's just there's always more people who are getting interested in finding out about a particular interest or hobby, and but there's always going to be somebody who's the leading expert, and there could be several leading experts, but those people generally are not the ones who sit down to educate more people. So it's great to have somebody that I think it's great to break that barrier, and there's not a piece of paper that you need to help educate somebody on something. I feel like I feel like that it comes with trial and error.
That's a lot of it.
Yeah, and owning your experience, right? Like if you're really learning something, then there's always takeaways to share, and whether or not those takeaways are valuable to somebody else is up to them, right? And you can't speak to someone else's experience. You can really only speak to yours. So if you can be confident in what you've experienced, then the world's your oyster.
No, that's a big thing. Like just accepting that you don't have to be a master before other people can benefit from your experience.
So I think what a lot of people are going to be wondering is, what the heck are you doing in Texas? Can you elaborate a little bit on how you got from New Jersey to Texas and what's going on?
Okay, so basically I got a new job working for Carbide 3D, and so I wanted to move out to California where they're located. They were okay with me like working remotely, but I've always wanted to make that westward move, and by always I mean like within the past couple of years. just with like the whole interest in space and like nature, and my friend taking me hiking. California seemed like the best combination of all of that, because like Vandenberg Air Force Base, they launch rockets out of there. You've got all those national parks, so everything I want in my life is right there. And so I figured I gotta get out there. I could just ship my car there, but there are so many people who I've wanted to meet up with and like do projects and like see the country, that I was like, this is my one chance to do it. And so I set out on it was originally about 3,000 miles, just the direct shot across the country, and whoever I can find along the way, so much the better. But then other people started cropping up, so in Houston, one of my friends who works at the Johnson Space Center said she'd give me a tour. So I was like, well, I can't pass that up. I got to pass through. And I know there's so many other makers in the Houston area. So that's why I came through Houston. And then my podcast co-host, Eddie Kramer, lives in San Antonio. So I was like, well, I'm going to be right there. I'll shoot over. We'll record a podcast. And then I was like, well, I'm already this far in the country. I've got a friend from grad school who's in Colorado Springs. He teaches at the Air Force Academy. Let me go up to Colorado, because it's beautiful, and I wanted to see that state. And then, while I'm there, Salt Lake City, I know there's a couple makers there. I'll stop there. And hey, in the middle of November, there's Autodesk University, a big convention where they sort of have a lot of teaching sessions, training sessions, and like vendors come through and stuff. Well, Carbide 3D is going to be there, so I'm going to have to be there. So I'll just go from Salt Lake City to Las Vegas, and timing all of it so that I was in Las Vegas at the right time for that. That was sort of like, that constrained my trip. Otherwise, I would have loved to spend another week. I would have liked to take the southern route, go through Atlanta, meet up all the makers there, the Carolinas. But then that would have been just a lot of zigzagging across the country.
I feel like you're just one trip from Seattle away from just putting a giant W across America.
That'll probably happen in 2019, because Joel Telling, 3D Printing Nerds up there.
Yep.
I've got an open invite to visit his shop. Bill Duran.
Punish Props.
Yeah. Like a lot of cool makers up there.
Definitely.
So to swing through Portland, Seattle, that's on the agenda. But I kind of need to take a break after this trip.
Yeah, it sounds like a long trip. What is the mileage now?
I'm at about, I want to say 1850, and 4400 is when I calculated to finish it, but that doesn't count like little loops around. Like, I calculated from Arkansas to Houston, not Houston, and then running around Houston, like doing all the loops around, like to your place, I got dinner with Evan and Caitlin. I'm going to go see Mikey the Maker in the afternoon. Then there's the jet over east to Johnson Space Center. Like, there's probably going to be 100 miles here.
Yeah, I mean, we've got 3 loops around the city. I had to show Heidi one day just how big the last loop is going to be. The Grand Parkway, which is 99, I think they estimate, is it 12 to 15 hours or something like that to take the whole circle all the way around, and just to wind up right back where you are. Yeah, it's insane. Houston is very sprawled out, for sure. It's very weird when I see other cities, and I'm like, you can get all the way across in 10 minutes? So, well, that's cool.
You'll be amazed when you come to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I mean, the closest I've come is like maybe 10 miles from it, but at some point I feel like I need to. I would like to do another tour of the country at some point, but when I'm ready and with a less constrained schedule. Sort of
with a camper van?
Yeah, that would be great. With space for a CNC.
Go 2020.
Josh Price, actually, on their fifth wheel, they had he had the little hatch underneath the bed in the back, and from the exterior of the fifth wheel, he was able to have a little shop. I don't know if you ever saw that, but I thought that was the coolest thing. He had to cut down his I think he had an X-Carve. He had to cut it down in one direction, but it fit perfectly, and he was able to put it on rails and actually had storage underneath and was able to push it in like a drawer and pull it out to work. It was really cool.
That's pretty cool. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it was really cool. So, with my wife and I living in a travel trailer all of last year and then moving into this house, it's been a complete shock on square footage, but I'm definitely looking forward to maximizing my space, even though people are like, oh, it's a 2-car garage, it's so huge. And I'm just like, yeah, but I feel like it's so small because I think of all the different interests that I have, and I'm trying to figure out how can I maximize the space and not not just waste it by putting large things there.
It fills up fast, and God forbid you find another interest like welding or something, like metalworking. That's going to be its own corner and take up a lot of room.
Or pottery. We my wife and I just lost a bid this week on a kiln. We almost got a really good deal on an auction for a kiln, and I'm actually a little bit glad we didn't get it because I would have had to run more power to the garage. So but yeah, there's a lot of different interests in the household, so it'll be very interesting to see how it grows over the next year and all with that. But
yeah.
Cool. Well, did you have any other questions, Heidi?
I do not, but I really appreciate you making us one of your stops on your journey.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
Well, if people want to find out more about you or CNC machining, where can they find you?
So if you just search for me on YouTube, Winston Moy, or my channel name Winston Makes, or winstonmoy.com, or I'm also on Winston Makes on Twitter and Instagram. Those are the best ways to get a hold of me, and otherwise, I don't know.
We'll definitely be looking forward to the camper van creation experience from you in 2020. Do you have anything coming right now that we can look forward to besides your traveling adventures?
So right now, the only projects on my agenda are from this road trip. But the next video I think I'm going to release is a tour of the Woodpecker Tools factory.
Nice.
It's kind of cool. They have a really high-tech operation going, that like multiple vertical machining centers, like turning centers. They're really high-tech for like making woodworking tools. So I think it's really cool. And then really cool. After that, probably a video that I shot at Bob's house.
Oh, cool.
So made him a branding iron,
nice.
And we had a lot of fun doing it. So
that's pretty cool.
Those two are up next, and hopefully they'll be out this coming week, assuming I find the time to edit. I've kind of scheduled myself super tight, so it's like I might have an hour or two in the evening. So hopefully that works out.
Well, you're in luck because chances are by the time this interview comes out, those videos will probably already be out. To
Excellent.
Be honest, excellent. I don't know where you actually fall on our release schedule, but I'm pretty sure it's probably December.
Okay,
it's got to be because we do you also have a podcast that you host too.
We
right?
do the Digital Fabrication Experiment, a podcast about all things CNC, and we do about every 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But like we've got a list of guest ideas that's a couple episodes deep. So we try and ration them out and like schedule them out and spread them out so they're not all at once. But I'm sure you guys have the same thing going on.
Yeah, it's very similar actually. I messaged Eddie, right?
Mm-hmm.
I messaged him the week after y'all released your episode was the first week of our release, I believe. It was right around the same time. It was around the end of June, beginning of July, and I thought that was just so funny. I was like, what are the chances?
Podcast siblings.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
It's been very interesting, and I've enjoyed following along with y'all's podcast and kind of seeing how that unfolds, and getting to actually get acquainted with Eddie. I wasn't acquainted with him before, and so it's been really interesting to see his work too.
Yeah, so connecting with him has been really interesting because I'm sort of linked in on like the maker side and like the builders side. He's all like his interests lie more with the Insta-machinist community, so like he's like chatted up a whole bunch of like really cool professional machinists, and that's a connection I didn't have. So when we sort of came up with the idea of a podcast, I was like, I'm gonna like bring all like the makers into like the CNC world, and he's like, I'm gonna bring in all the super high-end professional machinists into our podcast. And I was like, how do we like get that Venn diagram to line up like of the makers and the machinists, because that overlap is really small. I think I'm one of the few people who like have a foot in both worlds. And so I came into it thinking like, we're going to make a podcast specifically for CNCs and makers, because like I listen to like woodworking podcasts, they'll touch on CNC once. Yeah. And they're like, all right, the audience doesn't want any more. We're going to go back to like the regular traditional topics. And I was like, no, why don't you embrace that? Yeah. And so I wanted to make a podcast all about CNC. And so I didn't really have an idea how to do that, but meeting up with Eddie, he's like all about high-end machining, which is not a bad thing, because like through his podcast I got a tour of the NYC CNC shop. So I don't know, it's cool making connections on that side of like the Instagram world. But like we both come from kind of different backgrounds. Like I mentioned a couple makers and he was like, I'm not subscribed to them. I'm like, mind blown.
Yeah.
Like I thought they were like everything about like the social media world, but
it's really funny when you talk to different people and about how like what they're like. Oh yeah, I watch people on YouTube all the time, and you start throwing out some bigger names, and they're just like, huh? And then like, you have to watch this very interesting video. Like how do you not know about it yet? But it's interesting to Mikey the Maker is actually one of them too. You mentioned him to me, and he's locally based.
Yeah.
And he released his third YouTube video, I think, this week, and I had heard of him in passing, but I thought he was on a similar scale to me of small maker with a small following. And all of a sudden I go over to his Instagram channel and I'm like, he is not. He's very good at his craft.
It's all on Instagram right now. He's just getting started in YouTube.
Exactly.
So
it's interesting to see that swing, I guess, so to speak, of interest of how he's releasing. But the following that he has on Instagram is still huge. It's like just under 100,000. It's like 70,000 or something like that. It's a big following. And to not have that, to be completely off my radar, it's just a shock. And I was like the amount of stuff that he's done in just really the past couple of years. He said in his most recent video he really only got started 2.5 years ago, and it's been interesting to look at his backlog of stuff that I've missed. So.
Yeah, and so that's why it's good to reach out to people just outside your regular circles, and the whole networking thing. The amount that you gain from like meeting other people is tremendous. So
it really is. So that's kind of been one of the things about this podcast is we haven't intentionally just gone towards makers, even though we've interviewed quite a few of them, but we've tried to reach out to people who don't have Instagram or YouTube channels or anything like that, and they're doing something that they're very passionate about, but maybe people haven't heard of it. As simple as playing in a bass in a band, or the entire band that streams on Twitch regularly. I mean, it's such a niche thing that it's interesting. I don't know. And it's interesting to be able to spread that out to more people and have them find things that they would have never found before, I guess.
Yeah. You got an awesome thing going on.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you coming by. I mean, again, it's been great.
No, my pleasure.
Cool. Well, safe travels, and I can't wait to see what you do with your footage from this giant journey.
Thank you. I'll get up on YouTube soon enough.
Heck yeah.
Thanks for listening to that episode of Origin Point. If you'd like to check out more of this interview and others like it, head over to patreon.com/Origin Point. We'd love to hear from you there and suggestions on who you would like to hear us interview next. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and review us on your favorite platform. Thanks for listening.